Sogano Iruka is dead, killed at the hands of Imperial Prince Naka no Oe, who is now poised to take command of the Yamato Kingdom and lead Japan into a new age of great transformation. Will his grand designs bear fruit, or will they succumb to the fires of war both at home and abroad? Stay tuned for all that and more on today's episode of Japanese History, the Textbook, on the Buyuden Japanese History Channel. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Japanese History, the Textbook, the series where we make our way chronologically through Japan's history, focusing on the same points that are emphasized in history classes in Japanese public schools. This is part 2 of our exploration of the Asuka period, and part 5 of the series as a whole, so if you are new to the channel, I suggest you start at episode 1, or at the very least, backtrack to the episode prior to this one to establish some context. I have no particular preliminary announcements or comments to make today, so if you're as ready as I am to get into the second half of the 7th century, then let's begin. Japanese History, the Textbook, Episode 5, The Asuka Period, Part 2. In our last episode, we saw the main line of the powerful Soga clan overthrown in a bloody coup d'etat by the imperial prince Naka no Oe and his co-conspirator, bureaucrat Nakatomi no Kamatari. Resenting the non-royal Soga's vice-like grip on authority and fearing the military power that they were capable of wielding, the two men cut down the clan's scion, Soga no Iruka, in the middle of the royal palace in Asuka, and drove his father, clan patriarch Soga no Emishi, to commit suicide as a result. The plot had ended in success, but it was no time for anyone to be resting on their laurels, and all eyes were on Prince Naka no Oe as the political world waited for his next move. Immediately following Iruka's assassination, the current ruler, Empress Kogyoku, abdicated the throne in a symbolic gesture of the royal family's reclamation of their autonomy. Empress Kogyoku was in fact Prince Naka no Oe's biological mother, and she at first tried to pass on the throne to her son, but he refused the offer, arguing that his immediate accession would make it look as though that had been his goal in killing Iruka. Instead, Naka no Oe set up his uncle on the throne as Emperor Kotoku, while he himself became crown prince, Kotaishi, and Nakatomi no Kamatari took up a newly created post called Uchitsuomi, or Minister of the Center. This was also the point at which the top governmental advisor position of Oomi was done away with for good, being replaced by the Udaijin and Sadaijin, ministers of the right and left. The Omuraji position, by the way, had been vacant since the death of Mononobe no Moriya in the late 500s, and this too now firmly became a thing of the past. To help with the ambitious policy making that they intended to embark upon, the new government leaders also appointed 2 monks, Min and Takamuko no Genri, to be state scholars, Kuni Hakase. Both men had traveled to China on Prince Shotoku's 3rd embassy to the Sui dynasty in 608, where they had remained for more than 2 decades studying Chinese law and culture, and the knowledge they had accumulated there would be invaluable in reforming Japan into a more advanced country. Naka no Oe and Kamatari, acting through Emperor Kotoku, also proclaimed that year, 645 by the Western calendar, to be the first year of the Taika era, Japan's first named era. This era naming custom was derived from China, and it was based on the idea that the emperor had authority over time itself, and the name Taika was taken from a passage in the Shangshu, an ancient classic of Chinese literature, also known as the Book of Documents. At the beginning of the following year, the second official year of the Taika era, Naka no Oe had the emperor issue an imperial reform decree, the Kaishin no Mikotonori, which outlined the 4 main points of the policies he and Kamatari intended to implement in the coming years. The first article of the reform decree was essentially the abolition of the old Kofun-era Shisei system and the implementation of what is known today as the Kochikominsei, literally the public land, public people system. Under this new system, both Gozoku lords and imperial family members alike would no longer be permitted to possess their own lands and subjects, and the Tadokoro and Miyake land types, as well as the various categories of commoners like Kakibe and Koshiro, would be done away with. Instead, all people and lands would now be the property of the state, and gozoku lords would receive what was essentially a salary, called jikifu, from the central government in return for their service as bureaucrats. It should be noted, however, that the custom of bestowing kabane titles was left untouched by this change. Only the way in which the land and people were controlled would be altered. In the second point of the decree, they announced their intent to build highways and to establish governing bureaucratic offices in the provinces, which would now really become provinces in the true sense of the word, as they would be managed by governors dispatched from the capital rather than by indigenous local lords. This article also touched on the intention to place guardsmen called sakimori in the outer provinces and build post stations stocked with swift horses throughout the country for the quick relay of information. The third article announced the beginning of a census and the keeping of census records, and also introduced the concept of a new law called the Handen Shuju no Ho, the Law for Periodic Reallocations of Rice Land. Under this law, individual rice paddies, known as kubunden, would be distributed to every person in Japan aged 6 or older, and the recipients would be obligated to farm and pay taxes on those paddies. Finally, the fourth article of the Reform Decree declared that the various old tax systems which local lords had imposed in their own respective territories would be abolished, and a new uniform tax system would be established across the country. This system would go on to be called the Soyo-cho, with the So referring to the tax paid in rice, the Yo referring to conscripted labor in the capital, and the Cho referring to the tax paid in specialty products. There would also be another tax called Zoyo, which referred to conscripted labor to be carried out in the provinces. The actual content outlined in the 4 articles of the imperial decree would in practice require decades to fully implement, but the articles made clear what direction Prince Nakano-Oe and his associates had in mind for the country. All 4 points of the decree were aimed at reforming the Yamato kingdom into a strong, centralized state with a well-managed, well-controlled population, and the absolute authority of the emperor at its center. Or, at least, this is what the standard narrative was for much of modern history. In recent years, however, the veracity of this imperial reform decree has come into question. You see, all the information we have regarding the decree comes from the Nihon Shoki, the somewhat unreliable, semi-legendary history of Japan completed in 720 CE, which we have mentioned many times throughout this series. Actual archaeological excavations carried out in the Asuka region, however, have uncovered a huge number of what are known as mokkan, narrow slats of wood used for correspondence and record-keeping purposes prior to the widespread use of paper. The study of mokkan from the second half of the 7th century has revealed that a crucial kanji character employed in the Nihon Shoki's description of the imperial reform decree was not yet in use at that point in history, nor would it be for a good 60 or so years. This, plus a number of other suspicious points, such as the decree's anachronistic use of the word Tennô, emperor, have led scholars to believe that the story of the imperial reform decree may in fact be just that, a story invented by the writers of the Nihon Shoki. Whether this story was actually based on true events or not is currently something that remains unknown to us, sadly. But regardless of the truth of the situation, the content outlined in the Nihon Shoki's description of the reform decree does give us a good idea of the goals towards which the central government genuinely worked in the decades following. That series of very real reforms, beginning with the events of the year 645 and continuing throughout the Taika era and, by some definitions, until the end of the century, are known collectively as the Taika Reforms. Despite what may on paper look like the glorious dawn of a new Japan, the political situation in the halls of power remained ever turbulent. With Emperor Kotoku's accession, the capital was moved from Asuka to Naniwa in modern Osaka, but Kotoku and Prince Nakano-Oe's relationship gradually deteriorated, and the prince moved his base of operations back to Asuka. When Kotoku died of illness in Naniwa in 654, Nakano-Oe's mother, the former Empress Kogyoku, reascended to the throne for an unprecedented second reign, this time taking the name Empress Saimei. She is one of only 2 rulers in Japanese history, both empresses by the way, to ascend to the imperial throne twice, and with her accession the capital was officially moved back to Asuka. The political turbulence continued on with the execution of the late Emperor Kotoku's son, Prince Arima, who was accused of plotting treason in 658, and Empress Saime's frequent construction of new palaces in the Asuka area, a phenomenon partially brought on by fire disasters. It was also during this time that a general named Abe no Hirafu was dispatched up to northern Japan to begin trying to incorporate that region of the archipelago into the Yamato kingdom. Northern Japan, also known as the Tohoku region, was long viewed by the central Japanese aristocracy as akin to a foreign country, a viewpoint that really wouldn't change much until well into the Middle Ages, and the people who inhabited this region were called Emishi. Abe no Hirafu moved up the western Sea of Japan side of Honshu, conquering the Emishi there, building several forts and castles, and eventually establishing the region as the Dewa province. We haven't visited Korea in a little while now, but you will recall that in the early centuries of the Common Era, 3 large kingdoms existed that vied for power on the peninsula. There was Baekje in the west, which had long maintained a friendly relationship with Japan, and served as a conduit for more advanced mainland culture and technology to reach the hands of the Yamato kingdom. In the east and north were, respectively, the kingdoms of Silla and Goguryeo, both of whom had a record of military conflict with the Yamato. And in the south was the Kaya region, a conglomeration of small independent kingdoms and an area which Yamato Japan had long used as a doorway from which to assert its influence in the peninsula. The Silla, however, gradually grew more and more powerful in comparison to their neighbors, and by the middle of the 6th century, they had destroyed the various small kingdoms of the Kaya region and absorbed that area into their territory, simultaneously taking away Japan's precious foothold in Korea. In 618 CE, the Chinese Sui dynasty collapsed and was replaced by the Tang dynasty, and by the time of the Taika Reforms, the Tang had expanded the borders of their empire to reach into Central Asia, Vietnam, and the northern part of the Korean peninsula. The Silla, seeing an opportunity here, formed an alliance with this powerful new dynasty, and they would leverage this to finally destroy their old rivals of Baekje and Goguryeo and complete their conquest of the peninsula. Baekje's demise came first, in the year 660, but while the king himself was toppled, many high-ranking members of the Baekje court refused to give up the fight, and they appealed to their old ally Japan for aid. Prince Nakanoue, not wanting Japan to lose its last bastion of influence on the Korean peninsula, agreed, sending a large army across the Sea of Japan in 663 to re-establish the Baekje kingdom. This army, however, was crushed by the Tang Navy at the Battle of Baekgang, known as the Battle of Hakusonko in Japanese, in what proved to be a massive international embarrassment to Japan. The defeat spelled an end to any hopes of a Baekje revival or further Yamato influence in the Korean peninsula, but above all, Nakanoue and his advisors feared that the Tang and Silla would ride the wave of their victory to an attack on Japan itself. Work was thus quickly commenced on defensive fortifications all across western Japan, particularly around the Yamato government's regional base of operations in Kyushu, the Dazaifu. The term Dazaifu first appears in the Nihon Shoki in the section on Empress Suiko under the name Chikushi Dazaifu. However, the Dazaifu that existed at this time was not the one more commonly known to history, but rather an earlier iteration located on the coast of the Hakata Bay in a place called Nanotsu. The origin of this Dazaifu is thought to be a government office called the Nanotsu no Miyake, which was placed after a provincial uprising in 527 called the Iwai Rebellion, and its purpose was to better control Kyushu as well as to handle diplomacy with the Koreans. After the Battle of Baekgang, the Dazaifu was moved slightly further inland to its second and final location, which was a more easily defensible position. An array of new fortifications were built for the Dazaifu to stifle any possible Silla or Tang invasion, such as the Mizuki, a long water-filled moat built in front of the compound, and a Yamajiro mountain castle built atop the nearby Mount Oono. The aforementioned military guards called Sakimori were stationed in large numbers here, and a signal fire system was also established to quickly spread the word in the event of an invasion. Finally, at the old Dazaifu site, Nanotsu, a building called the Tsukushi no Murotsumi was built to welcome and entertain foreign embassies. Some problems can be solved with wine and words, after all. Thankfully for Nakanoue and his associates, the Silla and Tang would not attempt any such attack on Japan, but the Silla would destroy the Goguryeo in 668 and unite the Korean peninsula under their control in 676. With the destruction of the Goguryeo, the Silla and Tang became direct neighbors, leading to a breakdown of their friendship, and this friction may have been one of the reasons that an attack on Japan never came. After the defeat at Baekgang, the Yamato government shifted towards a more inward-looking policy, focusing less on overseas meddling and more on advancing the domestic Taika reforms. In 668, Prince Nakano-Oe once again relocated the capital, this time to Otsunomiya in Omi province, where he at long last ascended to the chrysanthemum throne and became Emperor Tenji. The next year, his longtime partner in crime, Nakatomi no Kamatari, would pass away, but just before Kamatari's death, the emperor bestowed upon him a new family name, Fujiwara, a name by which his descendants would hereafter be called. Nakano-Oe, the new Emperor Tenji, did not have many years left in his life either, however, but during his reign he did enact the Omiryo Law Code and conduct Japan's first national census, the Kogo Nenjaku, before passing away in 672. His younger brother, Prince Oama, was seen by many to be his prospective successor, but just before his death, their relationship deteriorated, and he designated his son, Prince Ootomo, to succeed him instead. With the emperor dead, Oama and Ootomo somewhat unsurprisingly came to butt heads over the succession issue, and their conflict quickly boiled over into an all-out war. Ootomo, technically Emperor Kobun at this point, was backed by many of the powerful central clans, while Oama secured his allies from among the outer provincial clans, many of whom had no love lost for Ootomo's late father Nakano-Oe. The clash between the two royals, known to history as the Jinshin War, saw Prince Oama defeat his nephew at various locations around central Japan, eventually culminating in the Battle of the Seta Bridge in modern Shiga Prefecture, where Oama was once again victorious. The thoroughly defeated Emperor Kobun, aka Ootomo, committed suicide shortly thereafter, and following his defeat, the balance of power in Japan was significantly shifted, with many of the powerful central clans who had backed him being destroyed or falling into obscurity. The triumphant Prince Oama had the capital moved from Otsunomiya back to Asuka, and there, in 673, he ascended to the throne as Emperor Tenmu, and indeed, he seems to have been the first emperor to actually take the title of Tennô, Emperor of Japan. This title, Tennô, is derived from an ancient Chinese word full of divine implications, but interestingly, it doesn't seem to have really been used by the Chinese emperors much at all. However, it is theorized that the third emperor of the Tang dynasty did briefly take this title, and that Japan's embassies to the Tang saw this and brought the title back to Japan. We first see the word Tennô being used by the Japanese in official diplomatic documents in the latter half of the 7th century, starting in the reign of Emperor Tenmu. Upon becoming sovereign, Emperor Tenmu chose not to appoint a single high-ranking minister, instead carrying out affairs of state together with his sons, the new imperial princes, and his wife, the empress. He established a new system of 8 kabane titles called the Yakusa no Kabane, which included a number of titles ranked even higher than the old Omi and Muraji titles. The top 4 titles, Mahito, Asomi, Tsukune, and Imiki, were given to the absolute top tier of aristocrats, and these titles would continue to be sought-after status symbols for centuries to come. One of the main goals of these new kabane titles seems to have been to further elevate the pedestal upon which the imperial family sat, thereby strengthening the power of the central government and discouraging any uppity low-level lords from even considering raising the flag of rebellion. Emperor Tenmu also began work on a new capital, Fujiwara-kyo, just north of Asuka, and this would be Japan's first capital to fully adopt the grid-oriented Chinese style of capital planning. Interestingly, a 2004 archaeological survey revealed that this capital was in fact larger than its better-known successor capitals, Heijō-kyo, aka Nara, and Heian-kyo, aka the city that evolved into modern-day Kyoto. Emperor Tenmu would not live to see his new capital's completion, however, dying in 689 and being succeeded by his wife, who ascended to the throne as Empress Jitō. She would see out the construction of Fujiwara-kyo and officially move the capital there in 694. The culture of the period between the beginning of the Taika Reforms in 645 and continuing until just after Empress Jitō's reign ended is referred to as Hakuhô culture, Hakuhô bunka, and is treated as a subcategory of Asuka culture. Hakuhô culture was heavily influenced by cultural elements brought back to Japan by emissaries to Tang China, and it shows a great deal of continental influence. Examples of this period's culture include the wall paintings in the Kondo Sanctuary Hall of Horyuji, which closely resemble the Ajanta cave paintings in India, and the wall paintings in the Takamatsuzuka Kofun tomb, which depict women dressed in Chinese-style finery. While sculpture in the first half of the Asuka period placed emphasis on a figure's appearance when viewed head-on, sculpture in the latter half of the period valued decoratively detailed figures that could be appreciated from any angle. As far as Hakuhô-style architecture, the temple of Yakushiji, commissioned by Emperor Tenmu and Empress Jito, is a representative example, with its eastern tower's beauty famously praised as being akin to frozen music. This was the era when Buddhism truly and officially became the religion of the imperial court, and we began to see these temples where the emperor was directly involved in their creation. The expansion of Buddhism also brought about the spread of Buddhist-style cremation funeral culture, and this, combined with a law issued in 646 which strictly limited the size of Kofun tombs, led to the gradual decline and eventual disappearance of the custom of tumulus burial. Finally, the fall of Baekje in 660 led many of that kingdom's aristocrats to flee to Japan, and this influx of educated, literate Korean people to the Yamato court created a boom in poetry culture. The Hakuhô era saw the development of waka poetry forms such as choka and tanka, and also the widespread use of manyōgana, a style of writing in which Chinese kanji characters are used only for their pronounced sound, rather than their inherent pictographic meaning. And on that note, my friends, we have reached the end of our look at the revolutionary age that was the Asuka period. Next time, we will get into that period that it seems like everyone's heard of, but no one really knows much about, the Nara period. Before we end here, I know that in the last video I boldly claimed that it's not a Japanese history, the textbook video, without a Japanese mnemonic, and I'm going to stick by that to an extent, but from here on, I'm thinking I'll throw the mnemonic up at the end just for those who want to see it. I personally think the mnemonics are really cool, and I want you to know that they exist, but I don't want to bore anyone who's not a student of the Japanese language. So, starting today, the mnemonic will come up after the outro here, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and
運を祈るぞ。